Hi guys, this is presentation 5 in module 2, which is a continuation of looking at client factors. In presentation 4, we talked about client factors in the areas of values, beliefs, and spirituality. And now we're going to be talking more about the body functions and body structures. When we look at body functions, this is pretty much all the physiological functions of the body as well as the psychological functions of the body. I like this little cartoon here. Basically, it's everything. It's from everything from the brain to the heart to the lungs to the muscles to the bones to the stomach, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about each one of these subdivisions or categories underneath body functions a little bit during this presentation. Please refer to pages S7 and S22 in the OT Practice Framework, as there is a lot of information and there's many categories listed under body functions. I'm not going to be able to go through every single section, or else this presentation would be an hour and a half long. But I want to make sure that you have time to look in and you read through these sections so that you're aware of what falls under each of the categories, because it will be on the exam. Okay. The first category that I want to talk about is mental functions. So when we talk about mental functions, there's three aspects. There's the ideas of affective function, which is how we deal with our emotions, our feelings, and our moods. I don't want you to have this be confused to effective, which is EFF, ECTIVE, as that's a means in trying to achieve a goal. So affective, we're talking about with an A, deals with feelings and emotions and moods. Then we look at the cognitive. This is the thinking component. This part affects all of the influence that our body goes through. It's those mental functions of just thinking in general, which you do on a daily basis. The next category is perceptual. This is how our senses are influenced by our experiences. So we tend to sense things through a perceptual being, which is still part under the category of mental functions. Body functions is the next category, and this looks at specific mental functions. These are those higher level cognitive abilities, such as judgment. Thinking is something safe or not safe. So you're looking at something hot or cold. These are judgment calls, okay? These are higher level specific mental functions. Concept formation, metacognition, executive functioning, which is pulling into account a lot of different specific mental functions at once. Praxis is the ability to have an idea of what you're trying to achieve, and then how to motor plan it, problem solve it, and execute it. So as you see, there's many steps and many categories in the area of praxis. Then there's cognitive flexibility. This is when you're thinking about one thing and your mind has to shift and change, okay? That cognitive flexibility allows you to be reading an article for this class and the telephone rings and you're able to change focus and answer the telephone or answer a text message. And then having insight to when maybe you've done something correctly or you've done something that's not correctly, and understanding what the consequences of that might be prior to having those consequences happen. They also go into attention. So when we're thinking about attention, this is shifting and dividing our attention. Can you think of an example where you've had to shift your attention or divide your attention between two or more things? When you're looking at concentration, how much concentration do you need to achieve at a certain point? Or how much you have to concentrate on something at a certain time? And then also the area of distractibility. So when we're thinking about shifting and dividing attention, let's think about, and I'm going to give you one example, and then I want you to think of another one. So think about driving. okay? You drive all the time and probably don't even think twice about it. Maybe you drive to the corner store, you get in the car, you start the car, you put on your seatbelt, whatever sequence that might be, you drive there, and sometimes you get there and you may not even realize or remember the components that you did while you were driving. But maybe one time you're driving to that corner store and a deer runs out in front of you. You're able to shift that attention to knowing where you have to go, driving on the road, how fast you're going, and reacting at that split second. That's what we're talking about. Same thing when you're concentrating. You might find that you can wash dishes without concentrating, even if you know you have sharp knives in the water or you have a glass in the water. You understand that you're just concentrating on the task, but you're kind of in autopilot. Okay, but let's think about now you're going to wash dishes in a restaurant. Okay, now things have gotten ramped up. You have a lot more dishes that maybe you're not familiar with washing. You have a time manner or very timely that you have to get these dishes done and get them recycled to go back out into the kitchen. So your concentration increases. You have a lot more responsibility, a lot of things that are going on. Okay. I think that that's it for that. I'll probably ask a couple more questions, but please let me know if you are not sure or if you have more questions about these areas. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about specific mental functions again, but now we're going to be looking at memory. Okay, we have what we call short-term memory, long-term memory, and working memory. When we talk about short-term memory, this is primary or working memory. This is a capacity of holding information, but not really manipulating that information. So it's really an active proponent of memory. So you might remember I'm watching Friends on TV, okay? And my short-term memory is that I know when a commercial is going to come. When we return back to the Friends show, I know it's where it's going to pick up. That's short-term memory. It's kind of a working memory, okay? The next part would be long-term memory. So now this is where information is stored, and it can be stored for shorter periods of time or longer periods of time. But it's easily retrievable, and it remains indefinitely. Now, of course, if somebody develops some kind of brain deterioration, the long-term memory can certainly be affected. It tends to happen more so in short-term memory. The long-term memory tends to stay on a little bit longer. But if it's a person like me or you that hasn't had any head injuries or concussions or doesn't have any kind of brain abnormalities, you can easily retrieve that information without really working too hard to find it. So let's think about maybe a combination to your locker that you had in high school. Now, some of you may have been out of high school longer than others, but you know what? I've been out quite a long time, and I can still remember my locker combination when I was in phys ed class. Okay, so that's what we're talking about with long-term memory. I don't even have to think very hard about it. I can also remember the schools I went to. I can remember what road I lived on when I was growing up. All of that is long-term memory, and it's stored in a way that we're able to retrieve it. When we talk about working memory, this is really the core executive functioning of the cognitive system. It has limited capacity in the fact that it's responsible for holding information, but it's kind of transient. So not only does it hold the information that we need, but it lets go of the information that isn't as relevant. So if you're thinking about, trying to think of an example here, you're studying for a test, okay? And you're looking at all the information and you understand that you have to have an understanding of what all these areas of occupation are, and you have to understand the OT practice framework. So you're going to start working, your working memory is going to be focusing in on those areas that are important. Even though you might be recalling Eleanor Clark Slagle and what she brought about in terms of habit training, and maybe you're going to look at Mary Riley, who brought about the concept of occupational behavior model. You might have that information stored in your long-term memory, but you're not going to need this for the working memory. You're not going to need this as that part of studying for this part of the exam. So that's kind of what we're talking about. It's transient. So it remembers what needs to be done, and it lets go of the information that isn't as important. When we're talking about the conversion between long-term and short-term memory, it requires some type of passage of time. This allows the information that we recall to become resistant to different kind of stimulation and disrupting factors so that it can be converted from short-term to long-term memory. The next area is perception. So this looks at the state of being or the process of becoming aware of something through your senses. You've all been there, where you can perceive something to be safe or dangerous. You can perceive something good or bad. It is a cognitive function, but it is influenced by experiences. So what happens is you recall an experience maybe that's happened in your past. You remember how that feels. It kind of sticks in your limbic system. That's where it's responsible for that. That's how those emotional components come about in terms of that sensory piece, is from your limbic system. So maybe you remember you were walking as a child, maybe like a teenager, and it was dark outside, and maybe somebody startled you. The next time you're walking, you're going to have that in the same area, and maybe it's a little bit dark or dusk. You're going to have that sensation of understanding or of recalling what happened before, and you're going to have that certain sense of higher arousal level. It's not the word I want to use, but that you're more conscious of what is going on. And another aspect is maybe you get a phone call and you are kind of anticipating that it may be really good news, and you start to feel that. That again is part of that perception. The last part here is thoughts. So these refers to ideas and arrangements of ideas that result from thinking, an act of producing thoughts, or process of producing thoughts. Okay, this is reality versus delusional, and it's logical and it's coherent. So it's something that it isn't really tangible. You can't touch it, but it's something that is going to happen. It's that thought that is going on in some kind of sequential manner. The next part that we get into is specific mental functions that are now related to movement. Okay, so we understand that when we move through our space and through our world, we're understanding where our body is in space. So we're not bumping into things. We're not tripping over furniture. We're not tripping over something that's lying on the floor. We understand that there's a curb in the road, and we are able to adjust our functioning to meet the needs of the barrier that is in our way. The next is regulation of emotions. Okay, so we all have emotions. We have ability to control those emotions most of the time, but that emotional state we understand, and sometimes we talk to ourselves to make it through, to get through things that might be difficult for us, right? You've all been there. Maybe you don't like to stand up and talk in front of a crowd, or maybe in front of a class. How are you going to prepare yourself? What are you going to put into place? What specific mental functions are you going to put into place so that you can do this and you can be successful? That's what we're talking about when we talk about emotional regulation and even those ranges of emotions. We understand that when you get up there and you talk to people, that you're not going to start crying. You're not going to talk too loud. You're not going to talk too soft. There's that range of emotions that are going to play a part, but you're going to be able to regulate them and inhibit maybe those feelings of anxiety, which is part of that specific mental function. The next one is having an experience of time and self. So this is being aware of our body, being aware of our position in our environment, being aware of how much time it takes to do something or how much space there is. Because when you think of space and time going together, that is involved in doing an activity. Because remember, we're talking about things that are related to movement as well. Think about a time where maybe you've sat on a toilet that was maybe higher or lower than you're familiar with. What did you do? You kind of startled a little bit, but you were able to adjust yourself. That is that's what we're talking about. You know how much time, even if it's a nanosecond, it takes from you to stand to sit on that toilet. If it takes you longer or it takes you less time, you have to adjust to that. Also think about stairs. Have you climbed up stairs or climbed down stairs that are different heights than what you're used to? Did you trip over them? Did you go too fast? Did you step too high? That's what we're talking about, having that awareness of what your body is doing. Okay. Now we're going to talk about global mental functions. This is, there's 3 areas here. This is the level of consciousness, the areas of orientation, and then temperament and personality. When we're talking about consciousness, obviously being awake, that first is the first thing that comes to mind. But it's also being aware and alert to times when you need to have that heightened sense of awareness and alertness. I work with children, as I've mentioned before, and often working with children that have sensory difficulties is that they are not able to sustain a level of alertness or a level of awareness that's needed for them to learn in an academic setting. They may need some external help in order for them to maintain the level of arousal that they would need, that is needed. But that's what we're talking about here. You've all likely watched TV, or you've at least watched Netflix, I'm sure. You've also read a book. You've driven a car, or at least rode a bike, or was part of bike riding. And you've all been in class. Think about the different levels of alertness and awareness you needed to have in order to participate in all of those activities. Now we talk about orientation. We're looking at orientation to the person, to the place that you're in. This could be the room or environment that you're in, but also what you're sitting on or where you're standing. Time. Time is in what time it is, such as on a clock, but also what time of day it might be, morning, noon, or night. What time of season it is, what season is, or what holiday might be coming up. That's all constitute areas of time. Orientation to yourself, understanding where your body is in space, understanding what you're comfortable doing and not comfortable doing, and then also being aware of others, being oriented to responding to those individuals on a personal basis. What is it that they're doing? Are you reading their body language? Are they reading your body language? The next one is temperament and personality. So this looks at basically your personality. This is something that is innate to you. All of us have personality traits that are unique to ourselves. There's a lot of personality assessments that are out there. If you haven't done one yet, good news. We're going to do one in this class. I believe it's in Module 4. I think it's always good for us to have an understanding of what our personality is. This is who we are. It's how we're made up. When we look at temperament, this is also innate. This is who we are. This makes up who we are. We can certainly get better at responding or processing information that happens around us. The only thing that we can control when working with another, when we're interacting with another individual, is how we respond to that individual. Certainly, these are things that we work on. We start out as a child, and we learn these techniques and strategies as we age and ultimately we become the person that we are now. But think of a couple of things. Would you call yourself an introvert or an extrovert? Are you emotionally stable? Do you feel that you have self-control, or maybe do you lack self-control? Do you express yourself in a way that other people understand and can read? Do you display a sense of self-confidence? And are you motivated? These are all things that we look at when talking about temperament and personality. Next is energy and drive, and also the areas of sleep. When we talk about energy and drive, what motivates us? What is your energy level? What is your appetite? Do you find that you eat at certain times of the day and then that gives you additional energy? Or do you, or do you have more of an impulse control where you eat when you have a craving versus at set times of day? These are things to consider. The next thing is sleep. This is a psychological process of sleep. Understanding how much sleep that an individual needs in order to have the energy and drive to get through the day. My husband worked swing shift for many, many years. And when he worked swing shift, he would work 5 days of a day shift, 5 days of an afternoon shift, which went from 3 in the afternoon to 11 at night, and then 5 days of a midnight shift. And so that kind of messes up your sleep schedule. And so when your sleep schedule gets messed up, it can certainly impact how hungry you are. It impacts how often you're eating, and then that can impact your energy. So all of that can therefore have a really a detrimental relationship with our mental functions and how it is that we process that information if we're not getting enough food and enough sleep to keep us going. The next thing that I want to talk about is sensory functions. We don't have to spend a lot of time with this. These are things that we're going to continue to talk about throughout the semester and even within the OT curriculum. But sensory functions play a big part. This is information that is brought in through our eyes and our ears, through our sense of movement, through our sense of taste or eating, our sense of smell. When we talk about proprioceptive input, this is the senses, or this is the information that is brought in and registered in our muscles and in our tendons. Touch, which is information that is brought in through our skin. What is our pain threshold and how do we process pain? And then are we sensitive to temperature and pressure? So these are all sensory functions. And as you can imagine, some people might have a heightened sense, a hypersensitivity in one area, which is going to impact their ability to carry out and process information in another area. For example, I will share that I don't like my food touching. So when you talk about that, kind of covers the area of touch, and it also covers the area of taste. It really bothers me when I have my food touching, and I also tend to eat what we call compartmentalizing. So I tend to eat all of one food before I go on to the next. Obviously, I function pretty well in life, but this is something that it impacts my social function, it impacts my ability to go out to dinner with friends and families, because this is who I am and this is how I am. But if you're working with a child, again, I'm going to go back on an area that I'm very familiar with. You work with a child that has hypersensitivity to tactile input through eating. They may not want to try different foods. They may, you may find that they won't try any types of foods. They won't go away from something that they're very comfortable with. So again, as you see, the sensory functions can play a part on how we engage in occupational performance. The next is the body functions, looking at, this is the movement of our body and also the stability of our body. So this looks at the muscles in the joints and what makes up our body. When we talk about joint mobility, we're talking about range of motion. This is how much motion do we have at a joint. When we talk about joint stability, this is a structural integrity, and this is how our muscles are composed and how it's able to provide structure and to provide support to our body. When we look at body functions, we're looking at the area of power, which is also looking at strength. We're looking at tone, which is looking at the degree of muscle tension that is present in our bodies. And we're looking at endurance, which is the ability to sustain muscle contraction. Then we look at the movement functions. Now we're looking at reflexes. Reflexes are involuntary control of muscles that are induced by a specific stimuli. You've all possibly been someplace where maybe you've stepped on a rock, or you've stepped on glass, or you've stepped on a nail. And what do? You quickly lift your foot off of that. That is a reflex. It is involuntary. It is used to protect us. When we are born and we developed those primitive reflexes that help us evolve and continue to grow. It helps our central nervous system actually mature. As certain components mature, those reflexes fade away because we no longer need them. But there are certain reflexes that we do continue, much like I said, the pain reflexes, because it's a sense of protecting ourselves and protecting our body. The next is an involuntary reaction. These are postural reactions. Think about if you're walking on a hill. Okay, so you're walking on a hill. How does your body position itself? It positions itself so that the center of gravity is, if you're walking up a hill, your center of gravity is tipped forward so that you don't fall backwards. So that's what we're talking about with involuntary reactions. If you're sitting on a chair and say the chair starts to tip backwards, you're going to lean forward. It's involuntary. Your body is righting itself in order to protect you and not letting you fall over. The next is control of voluntary movement. This is what we talk about a lot in the therapy world when we look at hand and eye coordination, bilateral coordination, crossed midline. We look at fine motor and gross motor control. We look at ocular motor control. We look at really how we control our body to engage in any kind of activity that we would like to do. The next one is gait patterns. This looks at gait, such as walking and mobility, and its role in how we engage in occupations. The next area of body functions are looking at the cardiovascular system. This is the heart and the lungs. It's looking at the hematological, immunological, and respiratory functions. So this is looking at the blood, the lymphatic system, and really those lungs to see how everything is moving. The next one is looking at voice and speech functions, the digestive and metabolic systems, the endocrine system, and then the reproductive organs. And then the last one is looking at skin and related skin functions. Now we're going to break away and we're going to talk about body structures. These are the anatomical parts of the body, such as the organs, the limbs, and all those components, the muscles, anything that you can basically touch. Those are the anatomical body structures. This allows our body to have the structure. Looking at this picture here, if your lungs were not where they were, it would not keep your chest inflated. Okay? If your colon was not twisted as much as it is there, it would not provide the anatomical structure of your stomach area. Same thing with the muscles. If you didn't have your quadricep muscles, which are in the front of your legs, if you didn't have those, that would not provide the structure for your legs. So that's what we're talking about when we think of body structures. This is looking at the nervous system, the eyes, ears, and related structure, all the structures related to speech and voice, the structures of the heart, respiratory system, digestive system, endocrine system, all the things we just talked about. Any structures related to movement, which would be the bones and the muscles, and then skin and related structure. When we think of skin, skin is the largest organ in our body. So how will you remember all of this information? Wow, there's a lot here. So there are concept maps, which you can look up. Just Google concept maps, and it'll give you some ideas of how to organize information so that you can remember everything. Some people like to use sticky notes, which can be very helpful, or flashcards. If you haven't yet done Kahoot, I would encourage you to go to kahoot.com, and you can set up and you can share with your friends or even one another possibly different questions or different quizzes that you can pose to each other. You can do note cards and then switch them with another student so that you're not reading exactly what you wrote, because therefore it's hard to break away from kind of what you're writing. You'd like to have some more of that mental flexibility. So you want to think about things as another person writes it down. And then write and rewrite using paraphrasing of information. These are just some ideas, but I'm open to hearing more about what will help you remember all of this information. Okay, that is it for tonight. Talk to you guys soon.